So I'd like to welcome you all to the Sunrise Center, and I am so happy to have my good friend Daniel Sheehan here, and all of you here, and Jacinta and Rich and everybody to look at these very, very powerful topics of the extraterrestrials and what their messages are to Earth. And he started with the Carter administration in 1977, exploring these issues around UFOs, okay? And he also formed the Christic Institute in 1980, which dealt with Iran-Contra. Do some of you remember Iran-Contra?
Sure.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right. And 3 Mile Island, and the things that went on with that. And then in 2015, Pope Francis, who much more enlightened pope in my opinion, said that he published his encyclical, and the encyclical said we need to pay attention to climate change, which was a big issue for me for a long time too. I trained with Al Gore as a climate project presenter, and interestingly, the extraterrestrials are saying some of the same things about the pollution among them from fossil fuels and things. So Sara was going to be with us, and there's a project that they've started called Let's Green California, which is duplicating some of what I helped start in Marin with Marin Clean Energy and pass it down to San Benito County, Santa Cruz County, Monterey County, right? All the way down to Ventura.
Yep, it's down to Ventura now.
Uh-huh. All right, and so we are creating a greener California, and they're also involved in some cutting-edge things around supporting lower-income people to have access to electric cars and charging electric cars, and working through the sticky wicket of our government. And of course, Daniel will talk a lot more about this. So without further ado, I want to welcome Daniel, who I love and adore.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, dear.
Okay, and your water is there, dear.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Far out. Thank you for coming this evening. And thank you, Laurie, for arranging this for us to come to the Sunrise Center. Thank you, Rich, for helping host us here. This is a great little venue, and thank you. Yeah, and this gives us an opportunity to come here and talk in sort of a more intimate setting about a number of these rather extraordinarily important issues that we're dealing with here. As Laurie pointed out, that Sara and I founded the Romero Institute. That's been up in Santa Cruz for about 20 years now, focusing on issues in California. That is the successor to the Christic Institute that we founded back in 1980 in Washington, D.C. We were in Washington, D.C. for some 20 years. Sara was the National Labor Secretary for the National Organization for Women, who started the Karen Silkwood case back in 1974. And I was legal counsel, general counsel at the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., in their national policy office, the social ministry office. And Sara approached us to ask us to participate in conducting the investigation and litigation arising out of the killing of Karen Silkwood, the young 28-year-old union activist at the Kerr-McGee nuclear facility in Oklahoma City. It was a crucial piece in the attempt to expand private nuclear power in the country, because as you probably know, one of the major challenges of the private nuclear industry is that they can't transport the nuclear waste materials that are generated by the nuclear reaction, because people won't let them be carried through their communities. Because if you have a train wreck or something like they had, in Palestine, or it could contaminate and kill tens of thousands of people. So various counties throughout the country have passed resolutions prohibiting them from carrying these materials through their counties. And so that they have to store all this nuclear waste material on their sites of the nuclear facilities, and they have a limited capacity for that. And so what they were trying to do is try to find out how they could reprocess the waste materials. They would send them to this facility that was out in Oklahoma, right in the home state of the United States Senator from Oklahoma, Robert S. Kerr. And he created this company called the Kerr-McGee Nuclear Corporation that was planning to reprocess the spent material, take it all, it's in this huge metallic chunk, and they would take it and then they would grind it all up into a powder and put it through these centrifuges and centrifuge out the plutonium that was much heavier. And they would put it in these little pellets and put them in these fuel rods and send them to the Hanford Fast Flux Test Facility in Washington, where they were hoping to be able to salvage from the waste materials the plutonium to make more nuclear fuel. And at the Silkwood plant, this young woman discovered that they were missing 40 pounds of 98% pure bomb-grade plutonium, enough to make at least 3 bombs the size of the ones that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So this was a terribly frightening situation that had arisen at the plant. And she was on her way to meet with a New York Times reporter, David Burnham, when she was killed. Her car was rammed and run off the highway into this concrete culvert, and the documents were taken out of her car. We did the investigation under the leadership of Sara Nelson in the National Organization for Women. We ran the investigation, caught the people that did it, brought a major federal civil lawsuit against them, won a $10.5 million judgment against the company, and shut the company down. And that's a lot of people first started hearing about us in that context as the Christic Institute that had done that. Prior to that time, I'd been involved in a number of cases. I was the co-founder of the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review at Harvard Law School back in 1968. And we had solicited contact from lawyers around the country who had very important constitutional issues that had arisen in their cases, where they thought the United States Constitution was being violated in some way. And they would contact us, and we would select out from a number of the applications, particular cases to do. And we had initiated, from the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review, back in 1968, we initiated the case that eventually went all the way to the United States Supreme Court and established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources that you've heard an awful lot about. It went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. We established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. I got recruited out of Harvard Law School by the major law firm, the #1 corporate litigation law firm in the world that represented NBC television, which was where the journalists came from that we represented from the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. So I got recruited by that company, and therefore I was the one who received the telephone call when the New York Times secured copies of the Pentagon Papers, the 47 volumes of top secret classified internal study that was done by the Rand Corporation for the Pentagon, looking into the sources and reasons for the Vietnam War and how it had progressed. And I ended up doing that case along with the other Cahill lawyers, and we won that case, establishing the right of the New York Times to publish all 47 volumes of that, which helped bring to an end the Vietnam War, because it actually revealed the fact that the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Department had been completely lying fabricating information. For example, that the Bay of Tonkin, where they said the reason that we had to send in 50,000 United States military into Vietnam to protect the people from there was because the North Vietnamese had been attacking our ships. And it turns out it was a complete total lie, and they knew it. But that they were just promoting that and promulgating that and deceiving the American public about it. And so that the publication of the internal study revealed that, and it helped bring to an end the Vietnam War. So I'd been involved in that prior to our creating the Christic Institute. I'd also gotten recruited by the law firm of F. Lee Bailey in Boston after the Watergate burglary. That our office represented James McCord, who was the former CIA wiretapping specialist who got arrested in the Watergate Hotel, and he's the one that actually wrote the letter to Judge Sirica blowing the whistle on Richard Nixon and the White House plumbers that led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. So I'd been involved in a number of those cases prior to going to Jesuit headquarters. That was one of the reasons I got recruited, actually, to become the general counsel for the Jesuit order in their National Social Ministry office back in 1975. And that is where we met together with the National Organization for Women to do the investigation in the Karen Silkwood case. And we set up the Christic Institute to do that, which was a joint venture between the two shops, an interesting alliance between the National Organization for Women and the Jesuit order, which is the largest single order in the Catholic Church, given the confrontation that exists between the National Organization for Women and the Catholic Church with regard to the abortion issue, which is, as you know, now a great source of new debate in the Supreme Court. So that we'd been involved in all those cases. We did the 3 Mile Island case that stopped them from pumping the radioactive effluents out of the partially melted core of the 3 Mile Island facility. They were going to pump it into the Susquehanna River, and we stopped them from doing that. We also did the federal civil rights prosecution against the Ku Klux Klan and the American Nazi Party down in Greensboro, North Carolina, that gunned down union organizers. They were trying to organize black people and white people together on an equal basis into the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers down there. And the Ku Klux Klan rolled in and gunned them down in a major demonstration with the protection of the police department there. And we did that investigation and won the multi-million-dollar claim against them and recovered money damages against the Klan and Nazis and the Greensboro Police Department for their activities there. We did a lot of those cases, but it eventually led to doing the Iran-Contra case, which was the major federal criminal racketeering act lawsuit that we filed against the off-the-shelf enterprise that you heard so much about Oliver North and setting up this private, standalone, self-financing, allegedly private covert operation enterprise that was smuggling weapons to the Contras down in Central America. We did that investigation, caught them red-handed, caught them not only violating the prohibition by Congress, but and we're in the process of leading to the impeachment of both Ronald Reagan and Vice President George Bush and Bill Casey, the head of the CIA, and Cap Weinsberger, the head of the Defense Department. We were in the process of getting to impeach all of those people when George Bush Sr. pardoned all of them. Pardoned all of those people, including himself, basically, because that was where it was leading to. It was going to be leading to George Bush, who helped coordinate the entire illegal weapons supply in defiance of Congress. So we did that case, except at the very end of the case, when then President Bush pardoned everybody, he demanded that our 501c3 tax-exempt charter be revoked on the grounds that nobody whom we had accused of all of these crimes was ever ultimately criminally convicted. That was, of course, because he pardoned them before any of them ever got to trial. And so he had the IRS revoke our 501c3 tax-exempt charter. And we were contacted immediately by the Romero Foundation out here in California that had been in existence for some 20 years. They were bringing educational supplies and things to the people in Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala. And when they heard that our C3 had been revoked by the IRS, what they did is they held an emergency meeting of their board of directors and elected me to be their president, and Sara, their vice president, and Father Bill Davis, our secretary-treasurer, elected to be their secretary-treasurer, and then they all resigned. And so we ended up becoming the Romero Institute. And we've been for 20 years in California doing projects. We have 3 major areas that we're functioning in up in Santa Cruz. One of them is the Indian Child Welfare Act. We got asked by the grandmothers up in the Dakotas to go up to try to stop this hemorrhaging of their children. They were taking hundreds of children, actually, 743 kids a year were being taken from their parents, their native parents up in the Dakotas, and put into all white foster care. And a number of them were disappearing, and nobody knew where they went. And they were getting adopted out to wealthy white families around the country. And so we went in to figure out what was going on there. We brought a major investigation to the state, confronted them, met with the Attorney General, met with their legislature to try to get this stopped. And eventually we drafted a whole set of federal enforcement laws to enforce the Indian Child Welfare Act, to stop them from doing that, because it was against the law, against the federal law, to be putting these children in non-native homes and taking them away from their entire culture. It was basically a repeat of the old Indian schools that they used to have. And so we were doing all that stuff up in the Dakotas, and were asked to come in, of course, to work on the Dakota Access Pipeline case at Standing Rock. And so we ended up defending Chase Iron Eyes, who was the guy who was accused by the Tiger Swan private military corporation that had been called in by the Energy Transfer Partners company in the Dakota Access Pipeline to try to quell what they kept referring to as an Indian uprising against their pipeline. And they accused Chase Iron Eyes of being a religiously motivated, indigenous, domestic, jihadist terrorist. And it turns out that was because the founder of the Tiger Swan Private Military Corporation that was called in for their security, Jim Reese, his name was the former director for Blackwater International. He was the head of all worldwide anti-terrorist operations for Blackwater. And prior to that, he had actually been the major liaison between the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the Joint Special Operations Command of the Pentagon in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And so that entire attitude was brought to bear domestically to designate the indigenous people here in the same sort of way that they were characterizing the tribal people in the Middle East, who were resisting the invasion and occupation of the Middle Eastern oil fields by the Bush administration at the end of the Cold War. So we've been involved in those kind of cases for a number of years, all the way back from 1970, basically. And that's gotten to be now over 50 years that we've been doing these kind of cases. And what I wanted to do tonight is I wanted to come and talk with you about 2 of the major areas that our Romero Institute is working on right now. And one of them is a continuation of the issue of the Let's Green California project that we initiated in 2015. as Lori referenced, when Pope Francis, the first Jesuit to ever become Pope in the entire 2,000 years of the Church, when he issued a papal encyclical, not only saying that the proximate causation for the global climate change that was going on in the world was in fact the emission of CO2 emissions from industry and cars and automobiles and the production of electricity on our planet, but that in fact the entire economic system of state capitalism, where the capitalist corporations that are private for-profit corporations are not only, all the shareholders are not only immunized as a matter of law against any personal liability for any of the products that are being produced by the company, but that in fact the corporations themselves are being subsidized to a very major degree by tax money, like the oil depletion allowance that's given to major oil corporations that, as they deplete the oil in a given well, they're given more and more federal money to go look for more wells. And it turns out that there's a whole major program that goes on in the government of financing the private research and development for a lot of corporations. The basic theory is that, whatever's good for General Motors is good for the country. And therefore, if the government helps finance the research and development, alleviating the stockholders in that company from having to bear the burden of paying for their own research and development, when the product is ultimately developed, they can make profits on it, and they can employ more people, and they can spend more money, and it sort of stimulates the economy. And Pope Francis pointed out that was an inherently sinful structure, because not only were the people who were getting the profits from those major corporations, completely immunized against any personal liability, which causes them to not exercise any type of discipline or control over the damages that might be caused by the products of the corporation, but that the corporations were also engaging in this practice of setting up these shell companies, that any of the companies that might end up being held liable for any of the wrongdoing were put off under a separate corporate charter, and so that they protected the shareholders in the major corporation that was responsible for the programs. So Pope Francis pointed that out in some detail in a papal encyclical called Laudato Si in 2015. And we at the Romero Institute then said, look, this is now becoming a regular drumbeat that more and more authoritative sources, in addition to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, are now coming to the kind of straight up conclusion that there's a direct correlation between the emissions of CO2 into our atmosphere and the proximate causation of global climate change. And so therefore, we as citizens and human beings have a responsibility for trying to figure out some new alternative source of energy than this, because also the petroleum is inevitably going to be depleted, and so that there has to be a transition to an alternative sources of energy. And so what he was recommending is that we take steps to accelerate that process, which we did. And in our office was instrumental in expanding the work that had been done by Lori and others up north here in Northern California, and had secured the passage of a statute here in California that if in fact the members of the County Board of Supervisors in a given county in California, or the council, the city council of a given city were to pass a resolution saying that they wanted to have access to electricity that was not sourced by the burning of coal or petroleum products, but wanted to have sustainable sources of their electric energy, they would be allowed to set up a public company that was not a for-profit company. And very importantly, they'd secured the provision in the bill that if, in fact, a given county board of supervisors chooses to go to sustainable energy, all of the previous clients of PG&E, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, would automatically transfer over to them. And that if anybody wanted to transfer back to PG&E, they could do that. But there was an automatic transfer of all of the customers from PG&E over to this company, because that was supportive of the general proposition in California that we had to transition away from petroleum and coal. Okay, and so that we got involved in that, and we helped expand the community choice energy companies from just up north here all the way down into Santa Cruz County and Monterey County, and all the way down to Ventura. And so we've gotten all the way down there, and now it's been transformed from the Monterey Bay Community Choice Energy Company to the Central Coast Community Choice Energy. And it's the largest community-controlled energy company in the entire world right now. And our Romero Institute had been instrumental in helping to bring that about. And so because of that, the Bishop Richard Garcia, made available to us the whole top floor of the former high school, the Holy Cross High School in Santa Cruz. And so that we have that, virtually that whole top floor. And so we have not only our research and investigation office that I head up, Sara heads up the administrative shop in the office. That we have a grassroots organizing office, community organizing office. We have a public education office that does all the Twitter and the social media, and then we do media production and stuff from there. We have a large archives where we archive all of the work that we do, that when we get a copy, for example, of the talk I'm doing here tonight, we have a copy of it and we put it in the archives so that it's available for people. And that's the work we're doing there. And we succeeded last year in actually drafting a piece of legislation for the state of California. The state of California had several of these incentive programs where a person who had a low enough level of income could go and apply to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different, entirely different incentive programs. And if they qualified for one or more of these, they would then be allowed to go and buy an electric vehicle. And when it came time for them to pay their taxes, they could deduct a portion of the cost of the vehicle from their income taxes. Now, the problem is that people that couldn't afford to buy an electric vehicle to begin with were excluded from the program. And anybody who didn't earn enough income to have a large enough tax bill from which to deduct the discount couldn't get the discount at all. So that people in the lower half of the income scale in California, over 50% of, vastly more than 50% of the people in the state couldn't get at the program. So what we did is we crafted and put into a statute the mandate that all of these different incentive programs had to be gathered all together, and the people did not have to try and go find them and apply for these things, that they were all communicated to the auto dealers who were selling electric vehicles. So they had them all on site. And the person who was going to buy the vehicle, all they had to do is go and try to buy a car, and then they were told what all the different incentive programs were that were available to them. And they could sign up for them right there. And then the deductions that all added up out of all the incentive programs would be deducted right from the price of the car. And so they could actually get the car at the discounted rate. Okay, so that actually made it possible for millions and millions of people in the state of California who were below a certain level of income to be able to purchase electric vehicles. And so we succeeded in getting that passed, which was no small task. I mean, that there are lots of these really bizarre rules in the state of California and other places that are designed to keep regular citizens from being able to figure out how to do anything. You know, that it isn't anticipated that regular people will participate in the legislative process. It's this very arcane process that we drafted, for example, a 350-page omnibus California Green New Deal statute that dealt with like 8 different sectors, not only the transportation sector, but the industry sector, the agriculture sector, the water in the state, and all these different factors that we did, and we proffered it to them, and they basically, you know, their hair caught on fire in the legislature, going, you can't do this. You can't have a bill that portions of which would have to be referred to different committees. You know, the utilities, anything that has to do with the utilities has to go to the Utilities Committee. Anything that has to do with transportation has to go to the Transportation Committee. Anything that has to do with agriculture has to go to the Agriculture Committee. And we're not going to divide it up, in, you know, which wouldn't be that hard. How about pages 6 through 15 goes to this one, 15 to 20 goes to the other? No, they're not going to do that. And you can't do it. So what we did is we backed off and we started taking pieces of this to get it passed. And the first thing that we did is went after this issue of getting the incentives made available actually to people. And we succeeded in getting this done. And in the process, we established the first alliance in the state's history between organized labor and the environmental community. Because usually the labor people resist any kind of environmental protection legislation that's going to potentially draw down the number of oil wells that are being drilled in the state, because their union people, the pipe fitters and others, are the ones that are hired to do all that. And so they would come up automatically resisting any kind of environmental legislation at all. And so we worked out this alliance now, because the shifting over into the electric vehicles, the United Auto Workers and the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers all are going to get more jobs. And so what we did is we said, look, let's just shift over and have an alliance here. And we not only set up the alliance between labor and the environmental community, but also the environmental justice community. A lot of the low-income people and racial minorities, where they put the oil wells and they put the refineries there and they put all the waste pits there. And so that we organized a major statewide alliance, and that we have over 50 statewide organizations that were all allies of ours to go into the legislature and basically hounded them until they passed this thing. So we've succeeded in doing that. And now that we have literally millions and millions of people that are going to be eligible to buy one of these electric cars, one of the problems is that most of the people in the low, moderate, and low income, they don't own their own house. And so they don't have an electric charging station at their house where they can plug the car in. And so there has to be all of these electric chargers that need to get built, these publicly available electric chargers. And the problem is we have been unable to persuade the state of California, or the federal government for that matter, to build some of these. You know, just build these things for people so they can charge their cars. No, they can't, so you can't do that. That's got to be private corporations that do it. It's that old thing again that Pope Francis was talking about. You know, oh no, there has to be money being made by private corporations here somewhere, because that's how we're going to get this done. And so then as soon as you get the private companies building electric charging stations, where do they build the electric charging stations? They build them where the Teslas are. Right? They build them in the high-income neighborhoods who've been able to afford the electric vehicles, because that's where you can get the most, you can charge the most for the charging stations. And so now what we've done is we've come up with a second piece of legislation. The first one was Senate Bill 1230, because we're going to pass 3 statutes, seriatim, 1, 2, and 3, to get to zero emissions. So it was Senate Bill 1230, and we succeeded in getting that through. And now we're working on Senate Bill 823, which is to actually give a charge card, as it were, to all the low-income people who can buy one of these cars. and so that they get a charge card so they can go to the electric charging station and swipe the card and get their car charged at the same low rate that is given if you have one at your house. Just the use of your electricity to charge your own car, which it amounts to less than $2 a gallon, the equivalent of this. And so now low-income people can have that too. And so that's what we're in the process of doing that now. And that's one of the things I wanted to come and talk with you about, to get you to go to our Romero site. It's very simple. It's Romero, ROMERO.info. And you can sign right up. And it'll take you to the Action Center. It'll show you how you can register. You can, and you'll be given forms so you can just fill your name in, and they'll send them to the state legislature advocating the passage of Senate Bill 823, and it'll give you all the additional information about it that you want and all the other things that we're doing. Which includes a lot of the Lakota stuff that, as you probably know, the Indian Child Welfare Act that we were actively involved in drafting the enforcement guidelines for has now gone all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And the present United States Supreme Court is considering the demand that's being made to strike down the Indian Child Welfare Act on the grounds that giving a preference to Native people to raise the Native children is racist. They've made the accusation it's a racist statute against white people. It's that one part of that whole classic thing, that any kind of affirmative action is racially discriminatory against white people. And so they've gone all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the law firm that is representing the plaintiffs in that case, which includes the American Association of Adoption Attorneys, that are making $100,000 apiece for every one of the Native kids they place with one of these families. That they've hired the law firm that represents the Dakota Access Pipeline, not coincidentally, Gibson Dunn and Crutcher. So they have, the law firm has, just out of the goodness of their heart, taken up this particular case for free to try to strike down the Indian Child Welfare Act. Because they understand that taking the children off the reservation and taking them away and putting them in the white homes is dissipating the power of the Native community. They're taking the new generation of kids away from there, and that they're trying to get rid of the tribes. They're trying to dissipate the tribes so that they can get out their land, so that they can drill on their land and get uranium on their land, and so that's what's happening right now. And so that you can get information about the lawsuit. We have filed briefs at the United States Supreme Court on behalf of Senator Jim Abourezk. James Abourezk was the United States Senator from South Dakota who was the author of the Indian Child Welfare Act back in 1978, following the occupation at Wounded Knee. Got that statute passed, and it's going to be decided in June, because it's going to be so controversial. Now, my own personal opinion is I think that we have succeeded collectively with others, NARF, the Native American Rights Fund, and others, to craft a position in front of the Supreme Court where we're going to be able to get Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, to side with us. That he's not going to say that that giving affirmative protections to Native children is somehow racist against white people, because they're a political entity that we have treaties with. It's not just a racial definition. We think we're going to get Justice Roberts on that, and we think we're going to get Justice Gorsuch on this as well. And when you put the two of them together with the three now other reasonable justices on the court, we think we can win 5-4 in the Supreme Court. But it's going to be important to have people organizing and helping us on this between now and June. They're still in the process of working up their positions on this. And so you'll see on our website at Romero.info, that you can see how you can also send letters and stuff to the appropriate authorities, et cetera, to try to get them to come forward to support the Indian Child Welfare Act. So that is Those are some of the things that we're doing with regard to the Indian Child Welfare Act. We're also doing this stuff with the electric vehicles. And we also, thirdly, in our Let's Green California, we are drafting a 300-page federal criminal racketeering complaint against the 6 major oil corporations in the state of California, accusing them of criminal fraud that they've known for over 25 years, that the product that they were producing is fatally flawed in that it's generating climate change. And they've known it, and their scientists have been telling them this for over 25 years. And not only did they not do anything about it and continue to produce their product that they knew was causing this, but they in fact lied actively about it, saying that they were convinced it wasn't true. Despite the fact that all their in-house scientists were telling them that it was true. And they not only did that, but they organized an entire American Petroleum Institute, a whole organization to lobby and get laws passed to facilitate what they were doing. And so that we've drafted a major federal criminal complaint against them that we're going to be lodging with the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California. And we're going to be filing it as well under the Criminal Profiteering Act, the California State Profiteering Act. We're going to be filing it with the Attorney General of the state of California, Rob Bonta. Now, it's important for you to understand that Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, is planning to run for governor. You know, when Governor Newsom's term limits out at the end of 2006, basically 2.5 years from now. And so Rob Bonta is going to be very sensitive to people demanding that he impanel a state grand jury to investigate the claims that are made. And we've, in the 300-page complaint, we've put in all the evidence. So I mean, they can't say, oh, well, you've made the accusations against them, but we don't have the time or resources to really do the investigation. We said, that's okay, we'll do it. We've done it. You know, we did it in Iran-Contra, we did it in the Karen Silkwood case, you know, we've done it in the Pentagon Papers case, we've done it in the past, so we know how to do this. And so that's why it's a 300-page complaint that's got the details in it. Now, what we need to do is we need to hire a couple additional lawyers to be able to help us on this, because we have to gather all the data of all the damages that have been inflicted upon people in the state of California, so that we can put it right in the face of the complaint. You know, most of the drafting of federal complaints are done in what they call bare bones pleading. But the reality is, we've learned over the past 50 years that you can't really do that with these kind of highly politically charged cases. You've got to put the information right on the face of the complaint so that the court knows that regular people can read it and see what the charges are. It's not like, oh, no, don't be bothered with this, just do it in very general form, and then they can pretend that there's no evidence. So that this is another thing you'll be able to find out about. If you go to Romero.info, you'll find out about the Federal Criminal Racketeering Act process we're going through, and you can see how you can help us in that particular program by potentially finding other lawyers who might be interested in helping us on this, and also potentially finding friends and yourself that might contribute funds so that we can hire a couple additional lawyers to work on this full time. Because as you might guess, I've got a dozen different things that I'm doing all the time, and that if I could turn my full attention to just that, we could do it. But I've got other things which I'm going to talk with you about tonight, and so that this is our Let's Green California. But in addition to all of those other cases that we've done down through the years, one of the cases that I'll turn my attention to now. Is that it started back in 1977, actually late 1976. Remember, in November of 1976, President Jimmy Carter was elected. He beat Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford had become president as vice president. He ascended to the presidency in 1974, August, when Richard Nixon resigned as a result of the Watergate burglary in his attempt to conceal and cover up the involvement of himself and others in that burglary. And so that when Jimmy Carter was elected, he got elected in some part because Gerald Ford had pardoned Richard Nixon. And everybody was so upset about that there was no justice ever done. He just had to retire early, and nothing was ever done to him for what he'd done. And people held it against him, and so they voted against Gerald Ford. They elected Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter came to office. He was elected on November 4th of 1976, and on November 19th of 1976, he insisted that he be briefed on the UFO issue. Because as you might know, he saw a UFO when he was governor of the state of Georgia. He came out of a meeting and there was a UFO, not like some light in the sky wandering around or something, or like a flock of birds or swamp gas. It was a UFO. It was just sitting right there in the sky, and there were half a dozen other officials that saw it with him, and he filed an official UFO report about it. So when we met with him, Stu Eisenstadt, who was his policy guy, I met with Stu Eisenstadt back in the summer of 1976 and went over a few things that we wanted President Carter to do if he got elected. And one of them was the issue of cutting off all military funding to any foreign dictator who was cutting off U.S. military aid to that dictator, if in fact it was established that he was systematically violating the human rights of his own citizens. This is why we got dragged into, ran full speed into, the action against the Iran-Contra enterprise, is because we're the ones that got President Carter. We set up a meeting between candidate Jimmy Carter and the heads of all 54 of the major religious denominations in Washington, D.C. When I was at Jesuit headquarters, we organized the meeting, brought candidate Jimmy Carter into a meeting, got him to agree, if he were elected, that he would sign an executive order cutting off all such military aid to any such dictator. And so he cut off military aid to Anastasio Somoza, the dictator of Nicaragua, and he also cut off military funding to the Shah of Iran. Ergo, the Iran-Contra conspiracy that began to set up a private off-the-shelf enterprise to be able to continue funding and giving military equipment to both of those groups, even though they've been officially cut off. Okay, and so the bottom line is, when President Carter did get elected on November 4th of 1976, one of the other major things he wanted to do was to get at the UFO information. So he contacted the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, who at that time was George H.W. Bush, who had been brought in by Gerald Ford to head up the CIA, because the CIA was getting dragged over the coals by the Church Committee, by Senator Frank Church in the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, which all arose out of the fact that the CIA people were in the Democratic National Headquarters doing the burglary. And so that they set up a major select committee to investigate why were these former CIA people and mafia people doing in the Watergate Hotel. And so that Gerald Ford brought in George Bush to head up the CIA to protect them against that kind of investigation. And so on November 19th, just basically 2 weeks after he was elected on November 4th of 1976, President Carter sent for George H.W. Bush, the director of Central Intelligence, and asked him to hand over to him all the information that the agency had on the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and the UFO phenomenon. And George Bush pleaded with him to hold him on as his CIA director. He wanted to become like J. Edgar Hoover had become in the FBI. And he remained one administration after another administration after another administration. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover, from back in the early 1930s, late 1920s actually, during the Palmer raids, the big famous Palmer raids that went down against, any immigrant who read more than 2 books a year, was being arrested and being chased around by Attorney General Palmer in the Red Scare, the big Red Scare of the 1920s. And J. Edgar Hoover had come on to head up a new group called the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and he remained as the head of that all the way into the 1970s, okay? And so the bottom line is George Bush wanted to be like that to the CIA. And so he pleaded with Jimmy Carter in this meeting to be left on as his CIA director, and Jimmy Carter told him no, that he had his own person that he wanted to have to be the head of the CIA. And so George Bush refused to give him the information about the UFOs. And he said, if you want to get the information about UFOs, you're going to have to contact the Science and Technology Committee of the House of Representatives and get them to contact the Congressional Research Office and have the Congressional Research Office, the Science and Technology Division, try to apply to get it declassified so you can see it. And so rather than waste a lot of his newly earned political capital, what Jimmy Carter did is he did that. He contacted the House Science and Technology Committee. They sent a request to the Congressional Research Service to conduct 2 top secret investigations, research investigations, one on exploring to ascertain the likelihood of there being extraterrestrial life elsewhere than on our planet, and whether it had any relationship to at least some of the UFO sightings. And I was contacted at Jesuit National Headquarters by Marcia Smith, who was the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Congressional Research Service, and asked if I would serve as special counsel to this investigation and see if we could get access to the Vatican archives, to see if we could get the Vatican archives to turn over to President Carter what they had on UFOs and the ET question. And so that's how I became part of that investigation as of the spring of 1977. And it was during that service that I got access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And Project Blue Book was a major investigation that had been conducted by the United States Air Force starting in 1952 to look into the issue of UFOs. But it proved to be a complete and total whitewash, and they had secreted away the actual sightings that were real UFOs. And the only ones they talked about publicly were the flock of birds and the swamp gas and that had been misidentified and all that. And they said, see, there's nothing to this. There's nothing to see here. And it ended up closing up that investigation. But I got to see the classified portions and actually saw photographs of an actual UFO that had crashed and plowed across this field and had dug this big trench through the field and was sticking in the side of this embankment all covered with snow. And there were Air Force personnel around taking pictures of it. And I had traced the symbols that were around the bottom of the dome of the thing. It was that clear. The pictures were that clear of this. And so I did that, and I brought it back to Jesuit headquarters, and I met with Father William J. Davis, who was my superior, my Jesuit superior. I was a candidate for the Jesuit priesthood at that time. And I met with Father Davis, showed him the copy of this. He reaches down, he opens up the drawer, and I told the folks the other night about this over on Saturday night over at the New Living Expo. But Father Davis opens up the drawer in his desk and takes out a little 8.5 by 11 manila envelope and hands it to me. And so I took the clasp off it and I slid out this little 8.5 by 11 black and white glossy photograph of a UFO. And so I said, wait, where did you get this from? And he said, well, my sister Dodie gave it to me. And I knew Dodie. I'd been to their family picnic and everything. I knew. And I said, well, where did Dodie get it? He said, well, she got it from Mike, her husband, who was the chief air traffic controller at the Washington State, Seattle, Washington Airport. And what happened, he said, is that Mike's best friend, who was a commercial pilot, was flying over the Northwest and saw this UFO right next to their plane and took out his camera and took a picture of it and brought his camera to the drugstore and got it all developed. And when he saw what he had, he said, look, I don't want to get in trouble here, so I'm not going to report this. But he said, I'm going to bring it to my best friend, Michael, who is the air traffic controller at the Spokane airport. And so he brings it to him and gives it to him. And said, okay, there, now I've done my duty, you've got it. Well, Mike didn't want to get in trouble either. And so what he did is brought it home and gave it to his wife, Dodie. And he said, here, Dodie, give this to your brother. He's a priest. So you see right immediately, you can see that people have this kind of instinctive belief that somehow this issue of UFOs existing and potentially being extraterrestrial challenges in some fundamental way some of the underlying belief systems of our human family. And that they want to invoke priests and get priests involved in this and trying to figure out how this adjustment is going to be made here. And so what I ended up actually becoming in 1994, I got contacted by Dr. John Mack. Dr. John Mack was the head of the Department of Clinical Psychiatry at Harvard University Medical School. And he is the guy that the United States military would send people to if some officer insisted upon making a UFO report and saying, we've encountered UFOs. You know, they're flying all around our nuclear missiles. They came over in 1967. They flew over the top of in Montana. They flew over the top of a Minuteman missile silo with 10 missiles in it and turned them all off. And they reported it up, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. And they caught them flying around all kinds of, around Yucca Flats where they were detonating nuclear devices. And people tried to report it, and nobody would do anything about it. You know, it was like everybody just kind of were like deer in the headlights, you know, as soon as you start bringing this subject up. And so John Mack was the guy that when some kind of high-ranking officer who threatened to be credible on this subject insisted upon making a report about this, he would be ordered to go get a psychiatric exam. Now they pretended that this was for his own good, saying, oh, well, you know, you're going to make this claim about having seen a UFO and all that, and people are going to think you're crazy, so let's send you to a psychiatrist to get a test so that we can get a verification that you're not crazy. And the person that they kept choosing to send them to was Dr. John Mack at Harvard University, who could, you know, give the bona fides to their levels of sanity. So John, after several of these interviews with these people, was puzzled by this all, and he was saying, "Wait, so this is bizarre." He said, "All the tests on these guys show that they're totally within the normal parameters of psychological health, and yet they're all telling this bizarre story about having seen these craft." You know, so he actually called his mother about this, and told her about this, and she said, "Oh, that's interesting because a family friend, the Hopkins family, that's a family friend of our family, Bud, their young son, is very interested in this. He's a fairly wealthy guy. He's a sculptor and a famous guy living in New York City, and he's been interviewing people who've had these kind of contact experiences. And so he's got a lot of things he can share with you." And so Bud Hopkins comes up to Harvard to see John and starts putting him in touch with all these other people. John ends up interviewing over 100 people who've had these kind of contact experiences. And he's so fascinated by this that he decides he's going to write a major scholarly article about this and send it to the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, John is no slouch. John is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He won the Pulitzer Prize in literature for writing the definitive psychobiography of T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. He actually wrote this, and he got the Pulitzer Prize for it. He's written over 100 major scholarly papers that have been published. And so he puts together this scholarly paper, and he sends it to the New England Journal of Medicine. And after several days, they send him a note and say, "Oh, we're not going to publish this." And he gets all upset, saying, "Oh, what the heck's wrong here?" So this is an important thing to be talking about, he said. And so what he's going to do is he's going to redo the whole thing and put in more footnotes and be very detailed and very scholarly about the whole thing. And then he sends it back to them. And within 2 days, the executive secretary of Arnold Relman, Dr. Arnold Relman, who was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, his executive assistant comes into John's office with the envelope still unopened and said, "You know, I've been directed by Dr. Relman to bring this back to you unopened and to tell you that under no circumstances are we going to publish anything like this. And he got so upset that he ended up calling a publisher and getting it published. And he wrote a book about it. Now, the publishing company chose to name it Abductions, Human Contact with Aliens. And the thing was published, and within 4 days actually, of the publication of the book, the dean of the medical school comes into John's office and says, John, I heard that you've published this book about UFO contacts here and ET contacts. And he said, yes, I did. He said, well, I've been getting some calls, and I don't quite know how to answer some of these questions. I thought you and I might have a conversation about this. Well, John was excited about that. This is good. I'm going to get to talk with the dean of the medical school about all this. And the dean says, and in fact, if we're going to have this conversation, why don't I invite a few more people from the faculty to come to this, and we can have a discussion with them. And John says, this is great. And so they set up a time, and John shows up to come to this meeting at the appointed time and place. And he walks in, and here's this tribunal sitting there, with like 5 professors on it, the dean of the medical school, and the legal counsel from Harvard University. And chairing the meeting is Dr. Arnold Relman, the chief publisher of the New England Journal of Medicine, who rejected his publication. And so they begin to immediately excoriate him and attack him for ruining the reputation of Harvard University by dealing with this kind of ridiculous subject. And they just started threatening him and started demanding that he turn over any recordings of any of the interviews that he had, any of the data. And he kept saying, this is all privileged information, that I did these interviews of these psychiatric workups of these different people. I can't just give that to you. And so that he resisted them. And so he goes back and calls his mother again. And she says, well, why don't you go to our family lawyer? Go to our family lawyer and have him give you some advice. So he goes over to the family lawyers in Boston at Ropes and Gray, and goes over there and talks to the lawyer. And the lawyer says, no, give them whatever they want. Answer any questions they want. Give them the tape recordings of any of the interviews you had. If they want to know about whether they had medical insurance and whether they paid you to do it, you give them anything they want. And he was flabbergasted. He thought that didn't seem like a very logical thing to do. And so he checks up and he finds out that the law firm, Ropes and Gray, were legal counsel for Harvard University. And so there was just a complete and total conflict of interest that they had. And so he calls his best friend, Ron Robertson, who he was in the Air Force with back during the Korean War over in Japan. And he was his best man at his wedding for him and Sally. And he calls him, and Ron Robertson is the head of the art department at the Santa Barbara City College. And I happened to be teaching there at the college. Sara and I both, we were teaching a major course called The Hidden History of America, the history of Central Intelligence Agency covert operations from World War II to the present. And so it was this gigantic class. We had like 1,200 kids in the class. They actually had to have 4 different classrooms where they had to be, and we had to do the course from the television studio on campus. And then they would broadcast it out to these other classes. We'd have 50 kids in the television studio that would do the question and answering and stuff like this, and then they would rotate kids through. So it was a big, huge class. And so Ron Robertson knew about it and had known about the Silkwood case that we had done and other things. So he ends up calling me and said, look, Danny, can you and Sara come to dinner at the house with Helen and me? Sara was doing something else, like she's doing a lot all the time. And so I went over to dinner, and we get all done with the dinner, and we're sitting there having dessert. And then Ron Robertson says to me, Danny, he said, I don't know, embarrass you, but he said, but can you tell me, what do you think about this whole issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and this UFO thing? And I said, I think it's one of the most important subjects conceivable. I said, it's just absolutely transcendently important. He said, holy mackerel. He said, I didn't know that. He said, how come you never said anything about that? I said, you never asked me, And so he said, well, look, my best friend, Dr. John Mack, is at Harvard University, and he's got this tribunal jumping all over him over there that was completely secret. Nobody was talking about it at all. And he wants to know, and I was saying, that I recommended, why didn't he get you as his lawyer? And John Mack said, no, Danny Sheehan did all these big cases, the national security statement. No, he probably wouldn't be interested in this. He'd just shy away from the subject. And I said, no, I'd be happy to take his call. So he calls me and flies me back to Cambridge, which I was more than happy to go back to see Cambridge. And so I go back, and we end up, I go into the next hearing with the tribunal. And right, we sit down, and right away, Dr. Relman starts attacking John. And I said, hold it here. I said, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but this surely doesn't look to me to be like an AAUP convened faculty hearing, under the Association of University Professors guidelines, of threatening someone's tenure, et cetera. I said, I don't know exactly what this is. What is this? What are we doing here? And Relman said, well, said, that when Dr. Mack published this book on, abductions, human encounters with aliens, he said, the dean of the medical school here, sitting here, started getting all kinds of telephone calls, and they were asking him all kinds of questions, and he didn't know how to answer them. And so he decided that, well, he'd have a conversation with you, and as long as he was going to have the conversation with you, he thought he'd have another from other people. Total bullshit. I mean, just a complete bullshit answer, because, this is a tribunal. This is not a friendly conversation. And so I said, well, okay, then in the spirit of cooperation, can you tell me, who is it that called? Right, that was exactly their response. Like, what? They're not going to say a word. And then Relman turns over to the legal counsel, and she shakes her head no. And he said, no, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that. And I said, okay. I said, well, then in a further spirit of cooperation, and you want us to get answers to these questions, what were the questions they were asking?
Oh, my God.
Nothing. He said, no, I'm sorry, we're not at liberty to discuss that either. And so I said, okay, well then let me just ask you this. I said, when we get started, can you tell me whether either one or both of the following fact questions are going to be at issue here in this hearing, whatever the nature of it is? Number one, whether extraterrestrial intelligence exists. And number two, whether at least some of these sightings of UFOs might actually be a vehicle from an extraterrestrial civilization. And Arnold Relman says, well, they're absolutely going to be at issue, and it's totally ridiculous to think that either one of those things is true. That's what he said. So I said, well, then in all fairness, I should tell you that Dr. Mack and I just spent the weekend with Lawrence Rockefeller, and Lawrence Rockefeller has promised to fund an entire grand rounds here at Harvard University on the issue. It will pay for all the witnesses. We'll fly the witnesses in. We'll pay for the whole thing. We'll video the whole thing. We'll broadcast it. We'll do oh, no, they said. And the legal counsel leaps to her feet and she says, absolutely not. She says, we're not going to allow these hearings to be turned into some kind of circus, she says. And so I said, okay, that's it, John. I said, let's go. And so I reached out. I said, come on, let's leave. And he's going, well, no, I can't. He's totally gentlemanly, which sometimes I'm not. And I said, nope, that's it. I said, when they're ready to listen to the evidence, that we'll come back. But no, we're leaving now. So I literally pick him up out of the chair and we walk out. And we went at it for 18 months until we finally beat them back. And what happened is John asked me to be in charge of organizing and presenting the witnesses. And I was going, oh no, don't throw me into that briar patch. I said, so I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I end up getting introduced by John Mack to almost everybody in the field. I get to meet Bud Hopkins. I get to meet, David Jacobs. I get to meet, Stanton Friedman. I get to meet everybody. And so I'm going around, for 18 weeks, interviewing, talking to these people, getting them all lined up to be witnesses and stuff. And the committee is having a hemorrhage during this time. And what I did is, since I knew that I was confronting them, and I had to protect ourselves because I'm not legally admitted to practice in Massachusetts. I'm admitted in Washington, D.C. and in Manhattan in the Second Circuit, in New York City. And so I said, I have to get a local counsel. So I end up going and getting, I go over to see Professor Tribe. Professor Tribe recommends that I go see, I go see one of the other professors. Anyway, so I go to see him, and he recommends Harvey Silverglate to go get him to be local counsel. I call Harvard Silverglate. Harvey Silverglate says, I'm up to here with cases, but there's this young fellow by the name of Eric McLeish, his name is, and he's a brand new lawyer, but he'll at least serve as local counsel for you. So I bring in Eric McLeish to be our local counsel. And Eric, kind of going by the book, says, no, wait a second, we need to settle this thing. We need to get rid of this thing. Dr. John Mack, is getting assaulted by these people. It's embarrassing. It's all completely secret. But he's being ostracized by the Harvard community. They aren't inviting him or his wife Sally to any of their social events anymore, and she's really getting upset. Sally's getting really upset. His son Danny's really getting upset about this. It's ruining his reputation in the Harvard community. Nobody else knew about it, right? So I'm going around contacting all these different people that John has recommended we call as witnesses. And one of them from University of Colorado gets so upset about the fact that they're doing this, he reaches out and contacts the national media and tells them that this is going on, and that it hits all the newspapers, right? And John gets invited to go on, what's her head? Oprah Winfrey. He goes on Oprah Winfrey's show, and he goes on all these different shows, and all of a sudden the committee is, their hair's on fire over this, and they're saying Sheehan did it. Danny Sheehan must have done that. He knows he hates us and he's trying to kill us, and all this stuff, and so that he must have been the one that did it. I didn't do it. But they said, you got to get rid of him as your counsel. And so John says, well, look, Dan, why don't you just step back from this, and you go ahead and keep on getting all the witnesses ready like this, and we'll let Eric handle it. Well, Eric McLeish, turns out, is the lawyer later. I don't know if you saw the movie Spotlight, about all the children, in the Catholic Church. Well, the guy who was settling all the cases and keeping them all secret for the Catholic Church was Eric McLeish, as it turns out. And I might have to take some responsibility because I'm the one that turned over the first case against the Catholic Church in Boston. We initiated the case and gave it to Eric McLeish to do. He ended up settling it and getting a huge amount of money for the people that it happened to, and getting a huge legal fee. And so he just turned it into a cottage industry. But anyway, it didn't work well here because he was just lobbying every single day to settle the case. And I was out gathering witnesses to do. And so the bottom line is they finally capitulated and gave in, and said that they would admonish him and say, you can't do any billing. You can't bill them for this if you're actually going to use their information as part of a study and all this stuff. And then he wouldn't admit any wrongdoing, and they ended up settling it. And then he had set up this thing called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research, the peer group at Harvard. And he had me become legal counsel to the group. And here we brought in people who'd had these contact experiences and all these different things, and they would sit and have these tea group gatherings, and I was the only non-experiencer other than John Mack to be able to sit with them. So I got to meet literally dozens and dozens of actual experiencers and to interview them as a lawyer, kind of cross-examine them and test whether they were credible or not, et cetera. And that's why I ended up later being contacted in 2001 by Dr. Stephen Greer, and I became legal counsel for the Disclosure Project. And we, in 2001, we called together 21 major government witnesses and brought them to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and did a major public press conference with them. Went to see the various senators and representatives of a lot of these witnesses, and I became legal counsel for the Disclosure Project for 20 years. And I also became legal counsel for the citizens' hearings in 2013, the citizens' hearings on disclosure, where we had former senators and Congress people come and have the evidence. We had 40 witnesses presented the evidence to them. And that's what led to me being retained by Lou Elizondo. And Lou Elizondo is the man who was the executive director of the top secret Pentagon study. investigation of the UFO phenomenon called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Project. And he is the one, along with Christopher Mellon, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, that brought the videos to the New York Times. They brought the 3 videos, the Tic Tac, and the Fast Walker, and the Gimbal. Those 3 videos that are all F-18 gun camera video footage of the UFOs that virtually everybody has seen. And so that all blew up. And so I represented Lou. He contacted me because he was afraid that they were going to threaten his security clearances for having revealed this to the New York Times. And since I'd represented the New York Times at the Pentagon Papers and knew Dan Ellsberg and everyone, the bottom line is that I represented him, and we went to the Inspector General of the Defense Department to challenge any threats to his security clearances, and got to do the same thing for other military officials. So I've ended up becoming kind of an available attorney for the people who might be threatened if they reveal the information. And so we then went to Congress and have been meeting with senators and congresspeople, and very importantly, there's been a law passed, signed into law on December 23rd of 2022, basically, Christmas Eve almost, so nobody knew it was going on. It was signed into law by President Biden, and it was a combination of Senate Bill 4503 and House Resolution 7776, and they set up a new government office. Set up at the demand of Congress, the statute mandates that all of the American military services, all of the Defense Department agencies, all of the intelligence agencies of the United States, and all of the corporate contractors, defense contractors, any of them who have any information whatsoever about the UFO phenomenon, that they are ordered to turn it over to the Senate Intelligence Committee and to the House Intelligence Committee and to the defense committees of both houses. And so this is for the very first time, Congress has now officially demanded that this information be turned over to them. And pursuant to the statute, they are required to reveal to the American public the basic information that they can, at least through their own lights. And if there's going to be a classified briefing as well to them, and their job is to try to figure out how much of this can be revealed to the American public. Now, I have been asked to set up a 501c3 tax-exempt office to ride shotgun on these guys, to be the watchdog of this committee. And this office, and to see how well the military services are responding by providing the information to them, how well the intelligence community is responding, the defense agencies, and very importantly, the private defense contractors. And this 501c3, we've set it up at the Romero Institute. And so it's set up under our 501c3. So we don't have to go to the IRS and have them threaten to not give us an independent tax-exempt charter. So it's operating under the charter of the Romero Institute. It's the New Paradigm Institute. What I want to do is I want to be able to talk with you about this because the Catholic Church has now issued an official statement about this. The Vatican convened under Benedict. Actually, Pope Benedict, they convened a group of world scientists and brought them to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome, where the Pontifical Observatory is, and spent over a week briefing the cardinals on all the information that's been going on. They came out of that meeting and went back to the Vatican, and out of the official press office of the Vatican issued an official statement on November 11th. Of 2009, actually stating that in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, it has now become clear that much earlier than had been previously anticipated, our human family is going to discover life elsewhere in the universe. And therefore, the time has arrived for the initiation of an extremely important conversation among the laity about the profound philosophical and theological questions that are going to be posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, in my capacity as a former chief counsel of the Jesuit National Headquarters in their social ministry office that was responsible for public policy formulation, I reached out to Father Funes, Jose Gabriel Funes, who issued the public statement on behalf of the Vatican, was the director of the Pontifical Observatory. And I reached out to him and flew to see him right within a couple days, sat down, and within the first 2 minutes of the conversation, he said, "Look, Dan, we're not talking about discovering some single cell life form beneath some frozen ocean on some distant moon in some other galaxy." He said, "We're talking about another highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human species right here in our Milky Way galaxy." And so I've said that one of the areas of responsibility of our 501c3 New Paradigm Institute is to facilitate that conversation, to have people come together in groups like this to discuss these questions. And they raise, of course, not only profound philosophical and theological questions, but also public policy questions, legal questions, economic questions, social, psychological questions about what the impact of this is going to be. Because you may remember that the last time something like this really happened was back when Copernicus, back in the 1600s, actually published a paper in which he, for the first time, asserted that it was his judgment. It was published in 1543 that the Earth was not the physical center of the entire universe, and that the fact is that our Earth revolved around the sun, and that the sun was just one of billions of stars, and that he actually made it out of life alive. He ended up being ordered to not publish anything more, but he did. The year of his death, in 1543, he published this to the world. And it was picked up on by Galileo in 1616. And that's some years later. And Galileo started publishing things about this, confirming this, and he was ordered to cease and desist by the Catholic Church, and he was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. And worse yet, Giordano Bruno was actually burned at the stake in the year 1600 for insisting that this was true. And not only that he said that he thought that the Earth was not in the physical center of the universe, but that he suspected that there was life on other planets around other stars. And he refused to recant, and he was burnt at the stake. And so that this massive shift in policy on the part of the church is extraordinarily important from a cultural and social psychological perspective. Because that the church is the Catholic Church is the largest single religious denomination in all of Western civilization, and it has extraordinary impact. Now, the Jesuit order, being the largest order in the Catholic Church, is the order of scholars, scholastic. They're teachers, and they run universities, etc. They also are most of the lawyers, and they're most of the diplomats, and also most of the intelligence services for the Vatican. So this is of extraordinary importance, which is going on here, because not only do we have the Catholic Church taking this position, but as you know, we now have the New York Times as of December 16th and 17th of 2017, front page story, above the fold, as they say in the New York Times, acknowledging the existence of UFOs as a real phenomenon. that they're not swamp gas. They're not birds mistaken for something else. And the bottom line is they've now solicited a report that's come out of the Defense Department that has gone to Congress that actually states that it's clear, they've looked into this, and it is clear that these are vehicles. These are vehicles that travel up to 20,000 miles an hour in our own atmosphere without any friction. And that they can, in fact, turn on a complete 90-degree turn, going 20,000 miles an hour, and come out of the turn going just as fast. They can come down from over 80,000 feet from space down to the very surface of our oceans in 0.7 of 1 second and stop dead like that, generating 600 Gs of force that would tear apart any vehicle and would turn to soup any occupants in the vehicle. And yet they just come to a stop and they go beneath the ocean and they travel at over 100 miles an hour underwater. And they're coming and going and coming and going. And there's a place right off Baja, between Baja and Guadalupe Island, which is due west of Baja, about 25 miles. There's a site there where these are sighted every day. And the United States military has based a carrier group there, monitoring the coming and going of these craft. And they have actually got submarines underneath the carrier group that monitors them on radar, tracking where they're going and how fast they're going. And so that we have come to a point where not only is that all going on, but as you know, with the launching of the James Webb Telescope, we now have the James Webb Telescope, which is able to basically, in effect, photograph the surfaces of the exoplanets. Can actually do a complete spectrographic analysis of the atmospheric conditions on the planets, can actually, through infrared photography and translating it through the computers to colorize the thing so that you can see the exact colors of the surface of the planets. And that I am convinced that in light of the nature of the extraordinarily carefully crafted statement on the part of the Catholic Church that starts out with, in light of the discovery of more and more of these new exoplanets, that what they're planning to do is feather into the consciousness of our human family. First, the existence of a single cell form of life. Well, that you hear them now working on water, that they've confirmed for the first time there's water on the moon, there's water on Mars, there's oxygen on some of these planets, there's carbon on a number of these planets, and that what they're doing is they're going to move from a single cell life form into a multiple celled life form, usually in the sea, and they're going to track basically planet by planet the evolution of life as it occurred here on Earth, with which people are basically familiar, of how it moved from a single cell into a multi-cell into aquatic life, and the aquatic life came up onto the land and developed, that they're going to be feathering in this process through the discovery of these various life forms on the planets. And at the same time, the Defense Department and the Pentagon and the intelligence communities and the United States Congress are in the process of trying to contain the information about these UFOs, because it's one thing to acknowledge that life may exist on some far distant planet that's 20 light years away. 40 light years is one of the nearest Earth-like planets, but what that means is they think that in 40 years they could send out a signal and a communication and get a communication back from that planet in 80 years. Now that's right where they are right now. And so that you can see what they're doing is they're setting the stage for this revelation to us. And what they don't want to talk about is the fact of who's in the UFOs. They just don't want to talk about it. And I can tell you that because I've sat in the meetings with the Inspector General, and all they want to talk about is the technology. How fast they go, what in the world is their propulsion system, what are they made of, how can we get one of these things, let's put it into our weapons program so that we can develop a weapons system that's like it, and it's just like the old Sufi saying, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. And so that what you've got is you've got these institutions that have these kind of conceptual blinders on, and that they're prisming through to this issue in an extraordinarily narrow way. And yet, what our job as the 501c3 is the New Paradigm Institute, given the historical reputation that we have of the kind of cases that we've done, all the way from the Pentagon Papers case to the Silkwood case to getting the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources, to the Iran-Contra case, all these things, that we're in kind of a unique position to be able to attract the credible evidence and to collate the credible evidence, to bring it together and to start this process. And so that what I've come here tonight to do, because of our friendship with Lori over all these years, is to come and to solicit your participation in this process. This is going to be extraordinary. This is absolutely trans-historical. I mean, this is going to have an effect upon our relationship with the extraterrestrial civilization for 10,000 years into the future. We are at that point right now where the kind of decisions that are made, the kind of policies that are developed, the kind of ability that we have to bring our human family along into this process is going to control what our relationship is going to be like. And there are profound questions that we have to come to grips with. Okay, once we're at the point where we're not any longer having the debate about whether this is true, because that's gone on for 75 years now, and I mean almost every grade school kid now believes that there's extraterrestrial life. They can draw pictures of them for you. And that 75% of the adult population in the country believes that UFOs are real, and they believe that extraterrestrial life exists. So that some of that progress has been made already, but we still have not come to grips with the answers to these profound questions that we have here. That for example, that just in closing before we start going to some questions, that 99.9% of all the people in the world don't have any idea about how to undertake a careful analysis of any of these ideas, okay? That people don't even understand what the basis of a philosophy is. I mean, other than you have a certain gastronomic feeling about something that controls your philosophy? No. A philosophy is made up of the conscious or unconscious conclusion that you come to about 4 fundamental pillar questions. One is, how did our material universe actually come into being? And the second one, that's the so-called cosmological question. The second of the 4 pillar questions is what they call the teleological question, and that is, how is our universe unfolding? Is it expanding out and going to expand forever, which you hear lots of conversations about? Or do they think there's enough matter here to kind of condense once they get to the point where the impetus was generated by the Big Bang, this blowing everything out and away from each other? When that is expended, will they come to a stop? And then the attraction that each ultimately irreducible integer of matter has for every other one, draw them back together to reconstitute the material universe till they condense back down into the size of the head of a pin that they now postulate was the origins of the Big Bang, and then the polarity reverse and they'll generate another Big Bang. And does this go on? Is there an oscillating universe that has existed eternally? That's the teleological question. The third of the 4 pillar questions is the so-called big one. This is the ontological question. And that is, what is the nature of consciousness? And how did consciousness arise? Assuming you have all these kind of material rocks and quarks and all these kind of things, how did consciousness come into being? Is consciousness just an epiphenomenon of some sort, of the interplay between mass and energy, that it's some sort of a penumbra around that kind of biological experience? What's the origins of it? And very importantly, what role does consciousness play in what they call the ontification of new entities? If you have a whole number of these small life forms and they come together and they form some sort of a protoplasm that ends up becoming a new entity, that actually has its own consciousness, separate from the individuated cells that make it up. What is the relationship between consciousness and that process happening? And a higher level of consciousness abides in the more complex, complex combination of life cells. And the Teilhard de Chardin talks about this, who's a Jesuit paleontologist, who was the guy who discovered Peking man. And he talks about the fact that there is this growing complexification of matter in the universe, and there's a correlative rise in consciousness that occurs in the confluences of mass and energy. He was ordered not to write about this because it was threatening the divinity of Christ, they thought. And whereas he was implying, or at least they were inferring, that he was suggesting that Christ was in fact a mutation, that in fact he was a full-blown manifestation of a faculty that is actually evolving in our human family that is analogous to seeing or hearing. Just like sight, the eyeballs evolved over billions of years into this extraordinary phenomenon of being able to actually directly experientially encounter vibrational frequency of light and actually translate it into data so that you can see what's clear across the other room. You can see on the other side of a meadow somewhere, and you can see what's going on. And the sound evolved, the hearing evolved the same way. That actually organs began to evolve teleologically that are able to respond to the direct, immediate experiential encounter with sound waves that have a certain particular amplitude, pitch and amplitude. And it generated the faculty of hearing. That they postulate that there is another faculty evolving in our human family. I talked about this last Saturday night, that when I graduated from Harvard College in 1967, went up to the law school, and I got word up there in the spring of 1968 that Professor Crane Brinton, who was the founder and chair of the Department of Intellectual History at Harvard University, had been there for 50 years as of 1968, and he was going to be delivering his final lecture at Harvard University on intellectual history. And they asked him to talk about and address the question of the single most important intellectual insight that he had encountered in his 50 years of studying intellectual history. And he came to the final lecture. I was there. I went down. They had to move it into a bigger hall in Langdale Hall because people had come from all around the world to come to be sitting in at this last lecture. And it turns out they were mostly all men, because I was the last all-male class at Harvard University out of 350 years. So we were right at that transition point of, rational response, finally, on the part of a university. And so the bottom line is, the place is overflowing with all these white-haired guys. And he gets up in front of the place and says, I've been asked to address this question of what I've thought is the most important single intellectual insight in the entire history of human history. He said, this is easy. He said, I'm certain that all of the greatest minds in our human family have come to the same conclusion, that our human family is right on the brink of evolving into the next step of biological evolution of our species. And that the way in which this new step in evolution is going to manifest itself is the coming to full fruition of a particular faculty that is evolving in our human family, like sight and hearing. But this faculty is a faculty by means of which we're going to be able to directly, physically, experientially encounter the unitive phenomenon that bonds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonic whole. He said, and by dint of this particular experience of unity, each individual person is going to be able to discern what type of human conduct, either individually or collectively, actually is in harmony with the natural order of the universe, or is in disharmony to it. And this is the basic fundamental premise of natural law, that this is an extraordinarily important insight, he thinks, on the part of the human family. And most importantly, if it's true, and what Teilhard de Chardin is suggesting is true, what we're experiencing is the flashing into existence of certain mutations in our human family who have this faculty more or less fully evolved. And that they're capable of all kinds of these extraordinary things. They call them the siddha, in Hinduism. You know, they're able to manifest material things. They can, in fact, teleport. They can do remote viewing. They have telepathic communication capacities. There's all kinds of these different siddha that are reported. And we live in a unique time when, in our generation, that this secret information that's been known for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years among the human family, is now available for you. You can go to the Yes bookstore, you know, and get books about it. But people don't do it, you know. But they have to do it. We have to do this now. We have to come to grips with this, because if in fact we're correct about all of this, it means that the common ground that we share with the extraterrestrial people from different civilizations, you know, whether they're taller than we are, bigger than we are, more technologically developed, if they share this same consciousness, then this is the common ground of relationship between us. But we have to evolve our consciousness. I mean, because the fact of the matter is that we are still drawing lines in the dirt and saying, if you come over onto my side of the line, I'm going to dig up metal from the ground and melt it and turn it into bullets and shoot them into your body and kill you. You know, this is fairly primitive still. And so, but we know what higher consciousness looks like. We know what some of the manifestations of it are. And what we have to do is try to work together to kind of accelerate the process by means of which our human family is moving progressively into this higher and higher level of consciousness. Because that is, in fact, the reason why, I suspect, the people from the extraterrestrial civilization don't just come down and land on the White House lawn and say, here we are. You know, they're saying, this is a scary species here on the planet right now. You know, that they're not quite ready for this. You know, I actually sat in a meeting with Lou Elizondo and some of the people that were in the staff of ATIP, you know, and that they then moved over into the staff of the special task force, the UAP task force in the Office of Naval Intelligence, sitting there in a meeting with them. And they were asking this question, why don't they come down? Why don't they come and talk to us? Why don't they come and help us? Why don't they solve the problems that we have here? Why can't they solve cancer? Why can't they provide some kind of alternative source of energy for us so that we don't have all this petroleum stuff? He says, why don't they do this? And I said, well, let me tell you what my thought is. I said, you know, it's important that, and I told this story the other night, that, you know, there was a little boy who, you know, loved butterflies, and he would collect butterflies. And he had this big, like, aviary out in his backyard of this big mesh, huge structure where the butterflies got to fly all around inside of it in their natural habitat. And he was looking for a perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly. And he finally found a cocoon of a monarch butterfly, and he brought it home, and he put it in a little box with cotton batting on it, and he shined little lights on it to keep it nice and warm. And he attended to this over time. And finally, after a long period of time, this cocoon started coming out. The little butterfly started coming out of the cocoon, and it struggled and ripped through the little cocoon, and it was struggling and struggling. He watched it for the longest time, and the butterfly was struggling and struggling with the last final silken thread that was holding it in the cocoon, and it was struggling and struggling and struggling against this last silken thread. And the little boy finally said, look, it's hurting me too much. I'm going to go help him. And he went and got a little pair of scissors, and he cut the little last silken thread, and the butterfly came free. And it was a gorgeous, absolute perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly, except that it could never fly. Because it turns out that in the struggle against that last silken thread was essential for the building of the muscle structures in the butterfly that would enable her to fly in the future. Okay, and that's the problem, I think. That, you know, we have to be able to break these last silken threads that we have woven around ourselves. You know, these problems that we've created on our planet are things we have done ourselves, functioning from our lower consciousness. So that we have this responsibility. Those of us in this room have this responsibility. We have to be able to take concrete steps. At the same time we're philosophizing and theologizing about all of these things, we have to take concrete steps to provide to the poor people some sort of an alternative form of transportation that doesn't contaminate our planet. We have to figure out alternative energy sources. We have to figure out ways of keeping young children being, you know, kidnapped from their homes and sold. You know, we have to be able to solve these problems ourselves. And in the solving of the problems themselves, we will begin to encourage the higher and higher levels of consciousness that people need to rise to. That's what I'm here tonight to talk with you about, and that's why these issues come together. Because one of the reports is that many people who have these direct encounters with the pilots and the people in the UFOs is they're trying to tell us, you've got to stop contaminating your planet. You've got to stop contaminating with all these chemicals into your system. You're destroying the environment of your planet. You're destroying the climate system of your planet. He said, and you also, of course, have to stop nuclear weapons and the nuclear power. You've got to stop this. This is deadly. This plutonium coming out into the atmosphere is going to give everybody cancer. You're going to be dying. To say nothing about blowing up the whole world and destroying, one of the rare planets in our galaxy. Not the only one, but one of the rare planets that actually gestates life. Our planet gestates life. And if we destroy it with nuclear weapons, we're wiping out tens of thousands of species that can be used to plant in different solar systems, to plant life in our universe. This is something that we all have to take seriously. So I've come here tonight to just share this with you, and to know that the Romero Institute is here asking for your assistance, asking for you to volunteer to help in this process, to set up meetings with your friends in your homes and stuff to talk about these things. They're filming the stuff so you can, not that this is a great speech or anything, but it's helpful, to sort of, arrange some of the information for us to know about. You can give contributions. You can go to romero.info and you can donate funds so that we can hire young lawyers to come in to help work on the RICO complaint. You can help us work on, passing, the new Senate Bill 823. You can help us with, responding to the final decision of the United States Supreme Court in the Indian Child Welfare Act, to get Congress to pass it again, in the face of whatever the court does. So there's a whole number of things that we can do, and one of them is I can be available to answer your questions right now, and begin to try to explore with you what some of the kind of questions are that you want to have answered in preparation for this extraordinary set of events that's unfolding all around us. Okay? Yeah.
So thank you for all you've done.
Yes, thank you.
Thankfully enough. So I have what I think is a solution for to at least initiate a change for a couple of the things you mentioned. Not all of the pollution and toxins, but the energy issues and the climate change. Mm-hmm. And probably most of the people who've been following the UFO topics for a while, one conspiracy leads to another, so you end up going down various rabbit holes. So the idea of zero-point energy
Sure.
and free energy,
Mm-hmm.
how the UFOs get here, now, those have been getting developed, and since at least the 60s, probably the 50s, there's been countless patents filed for these, and people basically get gag orders. Either the oil companies buy them up, or they get gag orders by their development being declared top secret, or they did get disappeared. People with Men in Black come and raid their labs.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably know about all that.
I do. I know all about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that the UFO issue and the climate change issue are totally intertwined, and it all has to do with big oil profits.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the UFO issue is kept under wraps, so is the method of their power.
Mm-hmm.
And if it became known well enough, if enough people knew, I think, that these people have created free energy devices on our planets without the help of any extraterrestrial. Maybe they got help. I don't know how they did it. But there's been these technologies that have been shelved by the oil companies.
Okay, but you notice the verbs that you're using here is that that if they could just get out. One of the most fundamental problems of this, and I've been to a dozen different meetings with people who thought they've had these things, is that they always want to get rich. Always want to get rich. They've developed it. They want to have it. They want to get a patent on it. They want to have the right to have no one else know exactly how it works, so they can get rich. And they go to the patent office, and the patent office immediately notifies the national security state people about it. Yeah. They come in and seize it. Okay. Now, what you need to do as a people who know how to do a particular one like this is you put it on open source. So you just tell everybody about it. You just give it away. This is a fundamental state of consciousness that has to be acquired here. They won't be able to stop it if people who've discovered the secret to these particular devices start putting them up on the internet all over the place. They aren't going to be able to stop this. But the fact is, and I told you, I've been to a dozen of these meetings. And they're looking for who's going to fund it for me. How much am I going to get to keep on it? All I need is a few $1 million a year. For me and my grandchildren's grandchildren, and then I'll let you see it. We've got to get people who have risen above that particular pecuniary motive in this, and it'll happen. I mean, we can get to do this.
I think it will, and I agree. That is a way out. And if the people who do create these want to make $1 billion, I have no issue with that.
People keep saying that. I have a major issue with that. Yeah, I know how to save the world, but fuck you. I want to be a millionaire, and so I'm not going to do it. I have a great deal of trouble with that every time.
I agree. They've gone about it the wrong way, and whatever. But I do think that if every conversation about climate change included the statement, all because big oil companies do not want us to have the free energy technologies that have already been developed and demonstrated, I think it would just get people thinking about it.
Well, people are thinking about it already. People have started talking about that. But I'm saying is that over and over and over again, it comes back to that same problem. And as Francis has pointed out, the root of the problem is this particular economic system of people thinking that, we have to have a corporation, we have to have immunity from any liability, we have to have investors come in, and the investors will want to have a percentage of the profits. The investors will always want to have the profits be much higher. They'll always want to keep the patent much longer. That's all those things. It's just functions of low consciousness. So what we have to do is we have to break through the consciousness challenge on this thing. We have to get this information out onto the internet, out across the world. We have to have them providing these things for free. We've offered to take these devices and manufacture them and make them available for people for free. And they go, whoa, no, I can't do that. And so I've been over to China. I've talked with Dr. Zhenzhou Jing. She's the head of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Science and Technology Division. They want to have them for China. They want to be able to develop the techniques for China, and so China can get the credit for it by making them available. The people are still wedded to these kind of narrow-minded constructions in their mind, and that we've got to work on trying to elevate our human consciousness to get this information shared. But you're right about your fundamental observation that if this information can get made available, then we can just surround the oil company, just atrophy the oil company, just make these devices available. Yes.
The Jesuit teachings go far back and are foundational and logic foundations of many sciences. Yet the basic problem that you identified is that at Harvard, this tribunal, which as an educational institution is not a body or authority of law, but a publicly available, accessible private institution for education, how they could basically have such control over an idea as to squelch it is really the question I have, because sociologically we're faced with a lot of this in other aspects of our daily life. Whether one believes a concept or not is highly debated. Even in our news and journalism now, the CIA infiltrates Twitter, yet the public actually thinks it was a good thing because they don't want fake news. But who's to determine what is fake and real, especially in this realm? Harvard wants to be the authority and wants to bury it, but yet whether it is the fundamental question of openness.
It's the epistemological question that I pointed out.
That's the basic crux of
What you have to do is education is one of the solutions, and the key is to try to have people engage in education. Things that you know, and things that you know how to explain in some detail, you have to share. You have to not be afraid of it. You have to not have people be embarrassed about it. The whole idea of sending out a message to the people in your immediate geographic area and say, here, I'm going to be having an event at my house where we're going to show this particular film, or we're going to do this, and people go, oh, look, I don't want to be considered a nutcase. What you're responding to is their countermeasures that they've taken, that they want you to think you'll be embarrassed. They want you to be embarrassed about this. So what you've got to do is act, with some courage. To organize people, to have house meetings, to have gatherings, to raise issues with your school, to do things like that. That's the key to this thing. This, as I say, the epistemological question is, what are the means that we have at our disposal? That was the fourth of the pillar questions that I didn't get to. I got hung up on ontology because it's so important. But the fourth one is the epistemological question, is what are the means that we have at our disposal as human beings by means of which we can possibly ascertain the truth? What do we have? Just our five senses and our ability to think logically, and process the data that we get through our five senses, through our brain, and be able to come up with logical solutions to things? Who do we accept as authority? Do we accept that's why it was so important when the New York Times did this article. People went, oh, the New York Times. Okay, I don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about it anymore. They've said it's okay. Oh, 60 Minutes. I saw it on 60 Minutes. So therefore it must be okay. Oh, the United States Pentagon said it's okay. And so those are all epistemological events that take place. And that's what the Catholic Church, that's why the Catholic Church saying what it said is so important. And what we've got to do is try to establish more nodal points of kind of authoritative thinking, and make the information available to people. And that's what we've got to do. And we've got to insist upon it. And we can't get trapped in having to rely upon, institutions that cost $70,000 a year to go to. We can't rely upon the public schools that are run by the state. The state is under the control of major corporations, and they're not going to teach the stuff in the schools. And so that what we have to do is we have to have a citizen uprising. We have to have a citizen uprising where we share this information, we talk about this stuff, and we share readings and share books and things that we have about it, and keep doing it. They'll try to close down, as you've noted, close down the internet. They're going to try to censor the internet. They're going to keep people from talking on the internet. They're going to bounce people off Twitter and stuff, But we have to also exercise responsibility when we find people that are just flat out lying about things. We have to take steps, not to say, oh, the government ought to step in and just tell us what the truth is. We have to figure out more constructive and realistic ways of guarding ourselves against flat lies like that. Okay, but it's going to take more work. I mean, if you stop and think, the percentage of time. And I've just met you just the other day. You think of the time you spend, and each one of us, the amount of time you spend actually trying to educate other people. It's very limited. And how much time do you spend studying and finding out about these things? We just have to change that. We have to work harder at this. If we're going to take advantage of the remnants of democracy that we have to step forward, and we have to begin to act as very aggressive and very active citizens to start doing this. That you may be right, that people are saying that the more active you become, the more repressive they'll be, because they let us get away with stuff as long as it's not changing anything, but they've demonstrated what they'll do down in Central America. I mean, those are United States Central Intelligence Agency people that are disappearing all the people down there. They're trying to raise up and just have a cooperative, have a farmers cooperative, and take control of their own land that they've owned historically, that the oligarchs have taken over through the use of military power, supplied with military equipment from the United States, on behalf of the major corporations. So that what we have to do is we have to dare to challenge some of these fundamentals. And one of them is this issue of corporate capitalism. We've got to be able to understand that just because someone critiques corporate capitalism doesn't make them a communist, doesn't make them, an agent of the Soviet Union or the Chinese communists. I mean, that's part of the effort that's been made on the part of the national security state to scare people away from coming to grips with these things. You got guys like Bernie Sanders and you've got guys like Elizabeth Warren, people like Warren, who are talking about this stuff openly. And what we have to do is get into supporting these discussions. That's what we have to do. But you're right, education is a key to this, Lori. And then Alan.
My brother was supporting Stephen Greer with a lecture series or attempted lecture series. I don't know what happened in Stanford. He became dismayed with Stephen Greer, finding him very money-oriented and also some degree of questionable integrity. And so my brother has seen a UFO, a really big one right in front of him. And I'm thinking that I could create an introduction.
Yeah, we should do that.
And he has tried to be at some workshops where you see UFOs. He saw one, but in one other workshop with somebody, I can't remember who did it.
Yeah.
But he did feel dismayed with Stephen, so that's one area. And I believe I can very much persuade him to help contribute to something for the greater good of the planet.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, also, I know some lawyers who would like to give some of their work towards this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have we thought about some lawyers who would also do their job, but also donate some of their time or something at a lower cost or something because they could be inspired? And then thirdly, I'm also one of the people who started Threshold Foundation a long time ago. There's a meeting in Oakland in July. I might be able to speak to this. I would need to have quality sound bites. I would need to be able to transfer more inquiries on the part of the foundation. I mean,
Sure.
They give away about $2 million a year, collectively. And also some of the Rockefellers have been a part of it.
I know.
So I'm thinking some of this might work,
Yeah.
and I'm certainly moved by how you shared.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just letting you know.
All three of those things are good ideas. I should meet with your brother because I'd heard that he'd had that experience.
Wendy probably shared with you.
Yes,
too.
yes, she has. So I'd be delighted to meet with him. And it is available. Lawyers are available. In fact, some of the major law firms, the Bar Association has required that major law firms, that are major corporate law firms, spend a certain percentage of their time engaged in pro bono legal services, so that they get credit with the Bar Association for doing things like that, so they don't have to charge for it. Yeah, but it has to be a 501c3 that they work with, so that there's government certification that this is a public interest operation that's going on. That's the advantage we have of having the major. We have audits every single year. We have an A+ audit rating. We have to do things like have annual tests of how to run the fire extinguishers in our office. We have to do all that. We have to take, when we go on a trip like this, we have to take a photograph of our odometer and when we leave, and then take a photo of our odometer when we return, and attach to it a copy of the Google map for the distance and stuff. But it gets us A+ audits. And so that everybody can just look at that and say, okay, that's an epistemological question. These people are squeaky clean, totally squeaky clean.
One other resource.
Yeah.
Is there any way that, the Catholic Church, yes, has been paid out a lot on sex abuse cases, but I'm sure they have plenty of money. They're the biggest landowner in the world, okay?
They have a lot of land.
Yeah, but is there any way we can get them to donate something too?
Oh yeah. In fact, they've approached us. The Franciscan order has offered to have us use the Franciscan Retreat Center up in San Juan Bautista. It's got 22 rooms there, and they have big dining facilities and all of that. And they've offered the facilities to us at a very discounted rate to bring in people from all 47 of the Catholic parishes throughout the entire Monterey Diocese and talk with them about these things. And that we're in the process of doing that. That's another one of the projects that we're going to be doing. So that there's lots and lots of things that we can do to work on this thing together. So yes, all of those things are important.
Donating people a place to operate is wonderful.
Yep.
I've been to your other place. Paying people to do research and I would say getting the Catholic Church to donate out of a moral thing, I think
Yeah.
would up their image also, away from the sex abuse stuff to
Yeah.
another level of possibility.
They respond. They do respond. I mean, that I've sat in the Vatican. You know, that when I go there, I stay at the Doma where Francis lives. You know, outside of the Vatican. You know, and you can sit in the dining room with him. There he is, and you know that we've been talking with them and his staff about the doctrine of discovery. We've gotten Francis now just 2 weeks ago to completely renounce the doctrine of discovery that basically undergirds the seizure of the land from indigenous people all around the world.
The major genocides.
Yeah, that's
all over the world.
it's a major
American Indians.
it's a major source of the policy. So he has renounced all of that. That we have this opportunity with this particular papacy to make some major headway on all of this stuff. So that yes, all of those are excellent ideas, and that's the kind of things that we need to have people talking with us about. We can think of a lot of these things, but we need people to assist us in helping to carry some of the water on this thing to do these things. Okay, so Alan.
Elizondo, you're the counsel for Luis Elizondo. He
Yes.
really spearheaded the beginning of the contemporary disclosure movement. What is the plan in place? There's hearings coming up on
19th.
April 19th, something else on the 21st. What's the plan for the ongoing disclosure that Elizondo and you and Mellon have in place, if you can tell us?
One of the major focuses is bird dogging the shop that's been set up, the Arrow shop, the all domain anomaly resolution office. It's called Arrow. The name that was given to it by the Senate was the Unidentified Aerospace and Undersea Unidentified Phenomenon Joint Program Office. Okay, but it's the same shop in that you get a major mechanical benefit of working on them to get them to do what it is we've got in Congress to tell them they have to do. But if they don't do it, we need to do it. There are 84 different tasks that they were assigned to perform, and that if we find that they're not performing one of them, we have to have the capacity to perform it. That's why the New Paradigm Institute is a thing that is in need of major contributions, so that we can help staff that up. I happen to know some of the people on the staff in the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. I've gone with Lou and stuff. We go and sit down with the congressmen and the senators in their office and discuss these things. There's an extraordinarily high level of interest in this, not the least of which is that they've been shut off from this stuff and they feel really betrayed, and so that we're working with them on that. So that's the focus that we've got is on that office right now, in trying to make sure that it has to do what the Congress has ordered it to do. And so there's a great, mechanical advantage in each unit of energy you put into getting them to do what they're supposed to do.
You mentioned the A word, aliens, non-human
No.
intelligence.
The fact is that when I sit across the table from the Inspector General, I say, look, you can spend all the time you want on trying to figure out how fast these things go or what propulsion system they've got and how can they do a 90-degree turn at 20,000 miles an hour. But you're going to have to come to grips with who's flying these things, and it's just and so it's clear that the memo says they're not supposed to be talking about that because it threatens the legacy legacy of the program, that for 75 years that they've not only lied about it, but that they've destroyed the lives of people who have just simply tried to file official reports about these things and to talk about it. So that we have to figure out a political mechanism by means of which to get this to happen, and one of the, I guess you could say one of the advantages is that those people are dying off.
Right.
They're all, but these are the people that house a lot of the information. So we've got to try to get the information out of them here in these last years of their lives, and that they don't want to spend the last 5 years of their life in Folsom Prison. So we've got to figure out how to get this thing to happen.
And have you read Elizondo's biography that he's writing? Have you read that?
I'm not at liberty to talk about it. I'm his lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Question, you talk about, who's flying these things, and then secondarily, we need to challenge fundamental assumptions. And so the framework in which I approach this is, what is the nature of anatomy and physiology itself? So if you look back to the discourse on the birth of Christ, for example, and the evolution of what is the nature of body and being, there's a line of thinking that looks to the priestess temples of North Africa and the parthenogenetic practices that they had, the priestesses who were self-fertilizing, and Christ was a miracle himself, and his mother Mary was a priestess who did a variety of practices that then had the phenomena of embodiment to be able to be a virgin herself. Okay? And so the question I ask is, to what extent can we look at the history of thought around anatomy and physiology itself over hundreds of years, not only in European societies, but all societies that have kind of high population densities and create boundary separation, like Japan, lots of people in a small amount of population. How do we know ourselves and being, looking at the arc of time and the question of, are we fixated upon a European model of prefrontal cortex and cognitive development in the brain? Not only are we not missing the entire central nervous system itself, but there's this evolving, what is the system's biology of the whole body, skin, and membrane that can be potentially evolving towards a more immunological based phenomena of being.
Yeah.
So how are we questioning who we are as a being that has a grounding, not in this kind of what I would say is a bit of a esoteric concept of this thing called consciousness, but for example, how does the immune system function itself in an inner psychic space, a defensive, we are one and being inner psychic. So the nature of, if we want to help a population to go to the future, might the path of helping people understand what is the nature of being and anatomy and physiology from a broader interdisciplinary area within Western science, but also if you look across cultures, that there's this commonality of balancing arts and sciences, whole body systems, precision science of the brain versus whole system anatomy, things like that. That feels to me, if we're going to help a large population in a very as neutral as possible, that's non-threatening, educating about what is the nature of body and being, that might help us then get into more states of vibrational consciousness in that's below the nervous system and such. I'm curious, to what extent might a conversation like that be arisen within the populations in which you discussed?
It already has. That there's an extraordinary amount of energy being directed to this whole issue of biophysics in the kind of esoteric dimensions of the human physiology. And the people that are involved in investigating the UFO phenomenon and the ET phenomenon are active in this whole area. Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff is the guy who was the founder of the remote viewing project at Stanford Research Institute. That these discussions go on all the time at the Remote Viewing Association. That they have scientific conferences on this thing. The Hindus, as you know, the Hindu religion has extraordinary amounts of information on the physiology of the human body and the things about which the body is capable and the things that psychic powers are capable of doing. This is all at play in this. It all comes in under the rubric of consciousness, because the biophysical entity that has this question that we pose: what's the relationship between consciousness and the ontification or entification of this particular confluence of mass and energy? How did this come about, and what is the teleology of this? What kind of effect do we have on our own physical evolution through our intentionality? What is the relationship between human intention and the material manifestation of alternative options? This goes on all the time, these conversations. This is an extremely important aspect of this, because we're going to be talking to other beings who have a different history. Their physiology is different in some significant ways from ours. And so what we have to try to do is compare and contrast what these are, what the potentials are that we have, what do we potentially contribute to the ongoing discussion in the galaxy about this particular issue. So the answer is yes to what you asked. Yeah,
So then how
it
do we
is.
translate that? How do we translate that into common knowledge and common practices?
Well, that's the second. That's the tactical question. The strategic question that you posed first of, is this in fact part of the dialogue and discussion, this particular dimension of human experience? The answer is yes to that. The question of how we translate that to a broader audience is a tactical question, which is one of a pedagogical question. Of how do you craft? And this is one of the things we have to come to grips with as a group. How far down do you reduce the information in order to get it understood by some people? The classic Sufi story. The Sufi story all takes place at 6 different levels. At 6 different levels, all at the same time. And so that a child can hear the story and have a very simple, totally coherent narrative that they're getting from the story. And a person with a little bit higher consciousness gets an entire additional dimension to the story. And you can do that. So the ability to communicate information in a package that has different vibrational frequencies to the communication is extraordinarily important here. Okay, and we have to deal with all kinds of these issues of like neurolinguistic programming, subliminal learning, all these kind of things. We're in a 11th hour here of having to accelerate the process that we're engaged in to get our people prepared for this. Now, I'm not in a lot of the conversations, which you might guess I've been privy to of late. There's a great deal of discussion on the part of what they call the legacy group that's been responsible for the policies for the last 75 years, that they're terribly worried about what they refer to as catastrophic disclosure. That they think if everything is revealed about what it is that's known about the other extraterrestrial civilization and how much has been known on part of certain elements of our government and our corporations and stuff, that it will totally destroy the actual confidence that the governed have in their governors, and that they view that as being catastrophic. Not the least reason of which is that they're part of the governor class, and that they don't want to lose that kind of control. And that's a fairly elementary insight, because that's totally human nature that they're like that. But we have to try to figure out how to deal with that. Okay, that the desire to conceal and only partially reveal the information is what's been going on for 75 years. But it's just a long drawn. The reality is, after 75 years following Roswell, to have the 2 youngest generations in our human family be as comfortable as they are with the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs and stuff is quite a feat, actually. From where it was 100 years ago. So that there has been a process that's been underway of sharing this information and feathering it into the culture. That our collective judgment, I think, is that it's been way too little, way too slow. Okay, but in light of the threat that we have in global climate change and potential thermonuclear weapons, both of which they've been continually talking about, we need to accelerate this process, I think. Yes.
The younger people are more aware of cosmic levels and certain other things, but there's also a strong push to disseminate the idea that AI is really beneficial and that it's the normal process for everybody. Like there's not that much collective discussion about what is humanity or what do we do to educate ourselves, and then there's this whole push for AI.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about the kind of existential threat that is posed in runaway technology, especially in this area of artificial intelligence, because it's attacking at the root of epistemology. It's attacking at the root of your being able to have any confidence at all in what you see. You know, you saw when Trump came out and said, "I'm going to be arrested on Tuesday afternoon." All of a sudden, up on the internet went these videos of him being dragged out of Mar-a-Lago, you know, basically by gendarmes dragging him down the street and stuff like this. None of which was true. It was just completely fabricated. And there are people who just kind of put that up on the internet to see what happens. You know, I mean, and so the question arises is, how do you respond to stuff like that without violating fundamental principles of the First Amendment and free speech and freedom of discussion and all that? Because you certainly can't put the United States government in charge of deciding what is truth. You know, so we have to deal with this. But this issue of artificial intelligence, I remember when Joe Firmage asked me to be general counsel to his science, what was it, SSI. He was going to try to build a faster superluminal craft, faster than the speed of light, an anti-gravity machine, and wanted me to be legal counsel to it. And one of the people in the project was Jack Safarty, big PhD guy. And Jack, he was just waxing dreamlike about having a computer stuck in his head. You know, it'd be so great to have a chip put in your brain so that you could hook right into the internet. You know, and that you could be able to just snap your fingers and know any particular fact that's put in the internet. And I kept saying, well, who do you think is going to run that thing? You know, who do you think is going to be in charge? I don't care who's in charge of that thing. Well, you know, I care who's in charge of that thing, you know, and so that, but what we have, and I don't want to go on forever, but the fact is we have entirely different worldviews among our human family. Yes. We have an entire octave of human worldviews that range all the way from authoritarian to reactionary to conservative to moderate to liberal to progressive to utopian. We have a whole octave of these worldviews. They all have different answers to these four pillar questions. You know, and that's what generates a different worldview. And so that they have different responses to these things. And in any kind of a democracy where you're going to have to take into account what various people think and feel, you know, that we can't just say, here, we've got the answer too, so we're just going to do it this way. Now, there's a book, I would recommend a book in light of this. There's a book that's called This Perfect Day. What was the guy that wrote it? Anyway, it's This Perfect Day is the name of it. And it's all about a future culture in which our human family has given over into the hands of a centralized computer, the decision making. And the peculiar part about the book is that everything the computer is telling everybody they have to do turns out to be just exactly what you wish everybody would be doing. You know, they all be really very kind. You know, they all respect, you know, the religious traditions. They do all that kind of stuff. And there's this one young boy who happens to have been born with, you know, one blue eye and one brown eye. And every month, every person in the community has to go to this little phone booth that's around in the community, and you go in and you stick your arm in, and they take a little drop of blood, and they run a test with the computers in a centralized area and figure out what additional vitamins and things you need, and what additional vaccine things you might need to have, and then they give you a little injection, and then you go away and you feel fine. And as he starts coming to the end of each month, he starts asking questions about, why is it we don't get to do what we might otherwise want to do? Why is it that this computer is the one that's telling us what we have to do? You know, I might want to do something different. I don't want to do anything particularly different, but I might. And why can't I do that? And then so what he decides to do is to put a little pad on his arm to let him take his little blood, and it makes the decision what it's going to get in there. But he has this little pad so that the injection goes into the pad, and he doesn't get it. And so he does this like 2 months in a row, and his feelings start becoming much more intense about this, and he turns into be a downright libertarian. And so he ends up, going into the library at night and trying to do research on these kind of things. And so it's a book. What's the person's name? Ira Levin. Yeah, Ira Levin is the author of this book. So you should get a look at that, because we have to answer that question with regard to the AI stuff. Even if the decisions that an AI computer might make might end up proposing the things we happen to like, if there are other people that don't like that stuff, what is our source of authority in making them have to do what we like? Do we have the freedom to destroy ourselves? Do we have the freedom to come up with really bad ideas? And so this is something we have to be very serious about this. This task I'm talking about, this New Paradigm Institute that we're talking about here, is talking about trying to design a new 8th paradigm worldview to finish the octave of worldviews that we have. That every one of the 7 major traditionally operative human worldviews is predicated upon the same common assumption that we are the pinnacle of all sentient life in the universe. And that even though we've been removed from the physical center of the universe by Copernicus and Galileo and Giordano Bruno, the fact of the matter is we immediately transferred over to being at the apex of the pyramid of all sentient life in the universe. And therefore, up until at least the last 20 years, the position of the middle marginalist, the 4th paradigm scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview, that they believe that the entire physical universe is just a stage on which to play out the role of our human species. To develop, more and more to have evolved from the primordial swamp up into starfaring people, but we're the ones. And so that we need to come to grips with what an alternative worldview is that we fit into. Okay, and so that's part of what we're engaged in. Let me get everybody's questions before we go to 2 here. Yes?
Okay, 2 questions. 1, what do you think of Paul Pantone's work? And 2, have you seen any information on extraterrestrials that don't have 1 head or torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs?
Interesting second question. It's really quite extraordinary, the commonality of virtually all of the species that have been identified. That they all seem to be quadrupeds, that they've got arms and legs, they've got eyes, they've got, now even the insectoids. The insectoids are large, kind of praying mantis type beings. The reptilians, obviously the grays, that they all have these kind of features, and it's not clear why. That the one of the inferences is, we must all be from the same common origin, but that may be, it may not be. But that's one of the scientific questions we have. That these questions that we're going to be dealing with are divided at least into 2 different categories. In fact, I'm in open discussions with the people at Stanford University right now. Stanford University is interested in having a 501c3 that addresses all of the hard science questions. All these hard science questions of the biophysics, the techniques, or the technology of the vehicles, and what are the biophysics of the aliens and all that. And I'm in the process of negotiating for them to delegate, to the extent to which they have any authority to do so, delegate over to us all the soft sciences, all the philosophy and religion and social psychology and all that kind of stuff. Good, give us all the rest of it. You deal with the nuts and bolts and things that you knock on like that. And so we're engaged in that right now. This is one of the really profound questions. Remember from Arrival is one of the very few that had a foreign life form that wasn't coming here to eat you. Well, a lot of them aren't like regular people that come and eat you. The blob, it came from outer space. Remember that with Richard Carlson and all those guys? Almost all the time when they don't look like us, they're bad, So the bottom line is that, Aliens, the whole movie Aliens has done a horrible disservice to the whole subject. But so have a lot of other, of these sensationalists and stuff. There are very, very few that are really positive. The Day the Earth Stood Still, both Michael the Rennie version and the Keanu Reeves version. The Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But you'll notice that in all of the things where they're really good guys, they're shaped like us a lot. To the point where there's one whole school of thought about them all being mutations of our human species, and that we're all from the same species, and it's just mutated on different planets. So this is an area that we need to look at. But with regard to your first question, I don't know which one you're talking about. What about?
Pantone
Yeah.
and Geet.
No, I don't know what that is.
Okay. He actually had, I saw one demonstrated where he could run a Briggs and Stratton engine on, he put in a Slurpee, put in soda, put in some gasoline. But what people have told me is that it works, but only as long as there's a little bit of gasoline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that I have heard about.
It's a good way to clean up water, though.
Yeah.
The other thing he said was he was in the lecture hall of Briggs and Stratton, and they have each wall has an entire photos of patents
Mm-hmm.
that have never been produced.
Mm-hmm. No, all that stuff. See, the advantage in having a place, the C3 that we're talking about, the New Paradigm Institute, it's like, build the field and they will come. That they happened with us in Iran-Contra. Once they knew that there was a group that was actually doing it, actually going after these people in a practical, realistic way, professional way, tons of people would come in with information. And so that we have the shop, that we're going to open up a shop ideally down in Los Angeles. We have our office in Santa Cruz. We have, the entire top floor of the old high school there with lots of space and stuff. So that one of these rooms will be devoted to the New Paradigm Institute, and that we can have meetings, we can meet over the internet, we can do all kinds of stuff. But we need to have a staff. We need to have a staff that can actually build. One of the things we need to do that we need funding for is building out the part of our website for the New Paradigm Institute. We've got one for the Lakota stuff. We've got one for the Less Green California. We have to retain Cosmic. It's a group in Santa Cruz that they cost a lot of money to have them build a professional website where you can have interactive links and all that stuff. So that's going to cost us many thousands of dollars to get them to build out the website so we can all communicate more easily. Right? And we can share information back and forth. We'll do it as best we can while we're trying to do all that. But that's one very important grant that we need. Someone could give us a grant to cover the costs, and we could just tell them what we need to have in the website. We go to Cosmic and get an assessment as to what it's going to cost, and then we can just post it so people will know what it is we need to have. So this thing with the whole investigation of how many different inventions have been suppressed and held down is a fact question that we will investigate. And we'll bring in a number of professional investigators. I've got, when I was at F. Lee Bailey's office, we had an entire private investigation firm with 40 Class A licensed professional investigators, and that we would assess any client, an amount that was going to cost to, it's a Moriarty and Associates, we retain them to do the investigation. So this has got to be done professionally. That's why we have to have your help, both personnel-wise and idea-wise and in any kind of financial contributions that any of you can get your friends to give, So that brings us to 10 o'clock. And I think that's when we had promised we would be out of here. People thought it was going to be a long time, but it turns out not to be such a long time when we get going on things. But I want to thank you for coming tonight, and you can contact us at the Romero Institute, romeroinstitute.org. Okay?
Yes, and I thank you so much, and you're keeping true to our time, and I'm amazed at how long the audience has stayed fully engaged. Thank you all for your deep interest.
Thank you, Lori.
In all of this. Thank you. And you can proceed further You know, he's made it really clear how you can proceed energetically or financially. And that's great. Who do you have handling your communications? Because I know you're busy in so many different.
That actually, when you call the main number, the general number is 831-459-6135. That's the number that I have on the cards that I have here somewhere. Would go directly to me. But that other number, the general number, this 831-459-6135, goes to Leslie, who will keep track of all the communications, and she'll be the kind of hub for all our communications back and forth. But these, I think the information is on those little sheets that we put on the chair. So you have, I mean, I've got cards here, but these have the same numbers on them. Okay. So do get a hold of us. We'll structure the internal workings of the New Paradigm Institute to facilitate your communications and get back to you right away with all the different things that you can do. Okay?
What happened to the place in Lake County?
Well, it's still there. It's still there. The castle, you know, we got provided a 70,000 square foot Art Deco hotel up there that had been closed. And it turns out that in the agreement, in purchasing it, Andrew Beath purchased it through the Earthways Foundation. And they agreed in writing, the County Board of Supervisors that had owned the place, had taken custody of it, that they promised that there would be no real estate tax assessed on it. And it turns out that the tax assessor for the county didn't feel that he was obligated to abide by their agreement, and he imposed a $148,000 a year real estate tax on it, as though it were a fully operational major resort, you know, and it hadn't been operated for 40 years. You know, we had to put in all the new entrances to be, you know, accommodating people with disabilities. We had to get the elevator in we did all that stuff, and we got it all set up. It's still there, you know, and it's available for us. And they've appealed interestingly enough, the appeal from a decision by the real estate assessor goes to the the County Board of Supervisors, who are the ones that promised there'd be no real estate tax. So we're optimistic that they'll rule in our favor, and then it has to go to the statewide Board of Equal, whatever they call them. Yeah, that one. So anyway, that it's there, and that we may have it in the future to be able to work with, but as of right now, we've got our office in Santa Cruz, and we're going to hopefully get an office in Los Angeles. I'm trying to get someone to donate the office to us down there so that we'll be able to reach out to a lot of the major media people in Los Angeles to help magnify our message. Okay?